I should have known something was off the moment I arrived at their house. It was a sprawling Victorian mansion, its silhouette looming against the backdrop of a stormy sky. The air was eerily still, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I had taken the babysitting job on short notice, desperate for extra cash, but as I stood there clutching my bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. When Mrs. Holloway opened the door, her expression was strained, her eyes darting around nervously. She handed me a sheet of paper without even a greeting. "These are the rules," she said, her voice low and trembling. "Read them carefully. Follow them exactly. No exceptions." The list of rules was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. 1. Do not leave the house under any circumstances. 2. The baby must never be left alone in the room after midnight. 3. Keep the curtains in the nursery drawn at all times. Do not look outside. 4. If the baby starts crying, do not pick it up immediately. Wait for exactly 3 minutes. 5. If you hear tapping on the nursery window, do not investigate. Ignore it. 6. Under no condition should you answer the phone after 10 p.m. I stared at the list, my pulse quickening. "What is this?" I asked, but Mrs. Holloway simply shook her head, her face pale. "Just follow the rules," she said. "We'll be back by dawn." She and her husband hurried out the door, leaving me alone with a sleeping baby and an overwhelming sense of dread. The first few hours passed uneventfully. The baby, a quiet little girl named Rose, slept soundly in her crib. The house was unnervingly quiet, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. At 11:50 p.m., I double-checked the nursery curtains, ensuring they were tightly drawn. A faint wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but I reminded myself of the rules. When midnight struck, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, and an oppressive weight seemed to settle over the house. At exactly 12:03 a.m., Rose began to cry. Her wails were piercing, desperate, the kind that made your instincts scream to comfort her. But the rules were clear: wait 3 minutes. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the list in one hand and my phone in the other, counting down the seconds. Sweat dripped down my temples. By the time the timer hit 3 minutes, the crying stopped. But something else began. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the nursery window. My heart stopped. The sound was deliberate, insistent, like knuckles rapping against glass. The rules flashed in my mind: do not investigate. Ignore it. I turned away, forcing myself to focus on the baby. She was staring past me, her tiny face pale, her eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. My breath hitched as a chill ran down my spine. Whatever was outside wanted to be let in. I retreated to the living room, trying to steady my nerves. The phone rang suddenly, the shrill sound cutting through the silence. I glanced at the clock, 10:14 p.m. Do not answer the phone after 10 p.m. The phone kept ringing, the sound growing more and more invasive, as if it knew I was there, hesitating. My fingers itched to pick it up, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I unplugged the phone, silencing it. That's when I heard it, a voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from the baby monitor. "Help me," it whispered, distorted and fragmented, like a radio signal struggling to come through. I stared at the monitor, my heart pounding in my chest. The screen showed Rose still lying in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. But the voice came again, louder this time: "Help me. Let me in." For the next hour, the house seemed to come alive. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, flickering in my peripheral vision. The tapping at the nursery window never stopped, now accompanied by faint scratching sounds. At one point, I thought I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, a tall, thin silhouette with impossibly long limbs. It didn't move, didn't breathe. I blinked, and it was gone. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed for me to grab Rose and run, but the rules were explicit: do not leave the house. By 3 a.m., exhaustion was setting in. I slumped into a chair in the nursery, keeping a wary eye on the window. The baby was quiet again, her tiny form peaceful under the soft glow of the nightlight. And then, the curtains shifted. A faint outline pressed against the fabric, like hands trying to push through. I clenched the list of rules, reciting them under my breath like a mantra. Do not look outside. Do not look outside. The pressure against the curtain subsided, but the air grew colder, the kind of chill that cuts through to your bones. At 4 a.m., the baby began to giggle. It was soft at first, almost sweet, but it grew louder, more manic, echoing around the room. I turned to her crib, and my blood ran cold. She was sitting up, staring at me, but her eyes, they weren't hers. They were black, empty voids, and her smile was too wide, too unnatural. The tapping started again, louder than ever. The voice from the monitor joined in, distorted and shrieking. When dawn finally broke, the house fell silent. The Holloways returned, looking strangely calm, as if nothing had happened. I handed Mrs. Holloway the list of rules, my hands shaking. "Did you follow them?" she asked, her tone almost accusatory. I nodded, too terrified to speak. She studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "Good. Most don't." I left without another word, vowing never to return. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that I left something behind in that house, or that something followed me home. The Holloways paid me in cash, more than I expected, but it didn't feel like payment. It felt like hush money. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear faint tapping on my bedroom window. I never look.